recognize, and many of you probably come from some distance to be here. So thank you for coming out, and we're going to get into our presentation here shortly with Dr. Kelly. But let me just say that we have a new book that has come out. I was just made aware of this. Very interesting timing with our summit starting this weekend. This is a new compilation. I don't think it's even available in the ABC bookstores yet, but it's called Ministry to the Cities, a compilation of the Spirit of Prophecy writings, which we thought was very providential and very timely. And we'll be presenting this book to our General Conference President Ted Wilson tomorrow morning when he'll be here speaking. But also, they're going to have copies of this book available tomorrow night for sale. If any of you would like to get a copy of this before it even gets out to the ABC bookstores. I was looking through it today. It's very powerful. Compilation of statements there. So we have that. Also, if you'd like to get on our Reaching the Cities newsletter sign-up sheet, we're hoping that in the aftermath of this summit, we'll be able to keep a newsletter going and keep you up to date with kind of developments that happen afterwards and other upcoming events. And who knows, maybe this will be the first annual summit here at Triadelphia. You never know. So if you want to put your name and email address down there, please do so and pass that around. And while that's going around, let me just have a brief word of prayer, and then I'll turn the time over here to Dr. Kelly. So we bow our heads. Our Father, we're grateful, very grateful for the week that you've provided for us. It's been nice weather, especially here today. And we're thankful, Lord, that the Sabbath hours are coming soon and that we can enter into that special time that you have created and that you've blessed and sanctified. So, Lord, give us all the rest that we need and that you intended and planned when you created the world and you made the Sabbath day. We reflect back on the perfection and the beauty that you made, and we look forward to the restoration of all things. And we know that there's a lot of work to be done in the meantime as we await the coming of Jesus, and we pray that you'll just help us through this summit to be inspired and to catch a fresh vision for what you want to do in us and through us to save souls, to enlarge the kingdom of Christ, to make his sacrifice more effectual for more people, that his death would not be in vain, but would lead to eternal souls saved eternally to praise and worship our Savior. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Okay. Let me introduce Dr. John Kelly, director of the Lifestyle Health Center down in Rocky Mount, Virginia. A friend of mine now for about a year. So happy that John is here. His wife Sally's here with him. And he is just a major contributor to the summit, organizing it, and responsible for a lot of our speakers that are going to be here this weekend. So, John, we're glad you're here. Looking forward to what you're going to share with us tonight.
Thank you, Rob. Well, welcome. I see some faces I recognize and some I don't yet, so I look forward to getting to know all of you. Let me just share, let's put the agenda. I have an agenda on my computer screen. I'm going to show you if it works correctly here, and unless it went to sleep. But we're going to have the agenda in the bulletin for tomorrow. Most of the things are happening tomorrow. But you can see tomorrow morning we'll be having during the Sabbath school time, we will be having the prophetic call to city ministry by Dr. Jeff McAuliffe. And then we will have during the worship hour, there will be the Elder Ted Wilson will speak, Pastor Rob, and myself. Then in the afternoon, we'll have some presentation by Gary Krause, thank you, from the Adventist Missions. We'll have Dave Fiedler, who will give a presentation on the historical context of the call to city ministry. Some of you may or may not recognize Dave has written the book Hindsight. It's an excellent selective history of medical work in the Adventist Church. Then we're going to have Jeff McAuliffe again. He's going to talk about the plans in the Pennsylvania Conference. Dave Fiedler, again, will talk about the work they're doing in Wichita. You can see that at www.adventistcitymissions.org. Then I'll be talking about the work we're doing using health ministry in the local church and a panel discussion. And so you can see what is, in a sense, gist of what's planned for tomorrow. I just want to give you, I don't want this to be formal. You know, formal presentations oftentimes fail to reach the heart. And the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, especially anytime we're doing something in God's church, is to reach the heart. So let me just take away the formality a bit by just sharing with you at a personal level how this came to be. The original idea for this event actually was for me to share with the Triadelphia Church the vision God has given me for urban medical evangelism using a church-affiliated chip-based outpatient lifestyle program. We've been running about 5 years. And the Lord had put a vision in my heart for taking that to an urban setting, because the probation, as I understand prophecy, probation closes in the largest cities first. And as a physician, you know, we learn triage. So I realized, you know, I need to be working on the patient that's going to die first instead of the one that's... So, you know, I have been looking for how to do that, how to take that model and work in a more urban setting. And, well, but it quickly became obvious that the Lord had more in mind than that, because as I talked with Rob and we spoke together as he shared with you, it quickly became obvious that there were a number of more people that God had in mind to be involved, and for the focus to be larger than that. So it really became what it is now, God's plan for reaching the large cities. If I were to say in one short phrase, that's what our focus is to be this weekend. God's plan for reaching the large cities. And so Elder Wilson, Ted Wilson, who's a member here, I'm not even sure I knew at the time that I first talked to Pastor Rob that he was a member, but he offered to contribute in some way if he could. Then Jeff McAuliffe and Dave Fiedler both agreed to speak. And both of these people I had learned from already, and so I was immediately drawn to the possibility that they would come. And in fact, I was telling someone just a little while ago, I'm looking forward to being more of a learner than a teacher, although I hope I can teach a little here tonight and tomorrow. But certainly going to be a student more than a teacher. Then Elder Krause agreed to speak, and what we were all impressed with was, you know, how could it be that we started planning this only about 6 weeks before the event, and all these people are available, first off, and then willing to come and speak. So I really do believe with Pastor Rob that the Lord has put this together. And then Pastor Wayne Cobano and Dr. John Torquato came all the way from Idaho, Washington, and we're looking forward to hearing about their experience with a combined pastor-physician ministry. And of course, Pastor Rob and I are going to be contributing. Now, some might wonder, well, what do all these different speakers and topics have in common? You know, what unites such divergent ideas and people and topics? And the answer, I believe, is this, that they're all part of God's marvelous but seldom properly understood plan for reaching the cities. You know, not that long ago, I first saw the statistic that 80% of Americans live in urban city areas. And so I know from my studies that God, we must reach, every one of them must hear, God is not going to close probation on someone that doesn't understand the issue. I mean, really, He's not going to give you your eternal destiny without you having had the opportunity to understand the issue. And so this I take as a task, a personal task. Not that I have to warn all 300 million, but we have to take this on. This is our privilege. This is our calling. And so our goal is to help with this weekend to better understand that goal and better understand how to pursue it. And by God's grace, we're going to have a vision casting session. What didn't show on the screen, it was down lower, but the last thing tomorrow night will be vision casting. And we invite you to come, share ideas, hear ideas. But probably the more important part is then on Sunday, we're going to have a planning meeting. And that's where we're going to go and take some of those expansion ideas and bring it down to some, okay, so now what can we actually do next week, next month, and next year? Because, so I invite you, your presence and contribution is needed and wanted, okay? So let me see if I can now get into tonight's topic. I'm going to talk about really three of my personal passions. So it's easy to talk about it. The hard part is stopping. So anyway, but anyway, I'll start with epigenetics. But I wanted to just tell you, I've had the privilege of doing research in the Marshall Islands, where diabetes is quite rampant. You may have heard it's approaching 40% or so. Some islands in the Micronesia actually are hitting 50% of the population with type 2 diabetes. And we spent $2 million, thank you to the U.S. government, in 3 years using lifestyle to treat diabetes in the Marshall Islands. And I was working with, had the privilege of working with the Canvasback missions, who are very active there. And we had a lot of success. In fact, I believe that the project turned the tide around in the Marshall Islands. Now, you realize that if I'm walking in this direction and I turn around, I'm still right here. So they still have a high prevalence. But I believe that they're going in the other direction now. And I think the tipping point in that nation was reached, and I'm sharing this because I believe there's a lesson for us all, was when we had done a lot of work with leaders in the community, and then we got the attention of the parliament. And we had a special program, a lifestyle program for the parliament, or they call it the Nidajela. And they had about half of the congressmen, if you want to call it that, half of the congressmen took the program. And about half of them had remarkable improvements. One picture in the paper they showed was a picture of a guy walking down the street. It was front page news because for years they had seen this man in a wheelchair because of his diabetes and the problems with his lack of sensation and other problems. And we caught him, obviously, if you know anything about medicine and diabetes, we caught him just at the right point where he still could get a lot of remission of symptoms. It's not always worked that way. But anyway, so I had the privilege of working there. And here's a little chart that shows you why diabetes is such a problem. One of the reasons is this is looking at the risk, 3 to 30 times the risk of heart disease and stroke. Now, this was the results of our first 10 days. This is what happened to the morning blood sugars in the first 10 days in the first group. And what this is telling us is there's about a 74 milligrams per deciliter drop in the blood sugars, in the morning blood sugars, in 10 days. And I mean, if I showed that in a medical conference and asked them what do you think we use, what drug or what did we do, there would be all kinds of interesting guesses. But no one would think that we simply changed our diet and exercise. I mean, but that's what we did. But anytime I talk about this, I always have people say, someone will say, well, I've just got bad genes. My grandparents had it. My dad's got it. I've got it. And it's just in the genes. Did you know we inherit more than just genes from our parents? We inherit a lifestyle. We inherit a lifestyle preference and a pattern. And that has, we're learning now, actually, I know you're going to think this is extreme. Go look it up and check me out. The evidence is now pretty clear that the inherited lifestyle has more impact on our health than the inherited genes. I'm going to try to show you a little bit about that here in a minute. You probably saw this, maybe not, but January 2010, Time magazine had a special issue. The entire thing was dedicated to why your DNA isn't your destiny. And their byline was, the new science of epigenetics reveals how the choices we make can change our genes and those of our kids. And that's kind of exciting. You know, if you see a glass of water, do you say it's half full or do you say it's half empty? Well, I'm the type, I usually say it's half full. So you could look at this and say, oh no. I look at this and say, oh, great. The story really started back in the early 1950s when Watson and Crick received the Nobel Prize for determining and showing that deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, was the molecule of inheritance, that all of the information required to make a human being was in the DNA strand that we have in each cell. And then the story really gets exciting about a decade or so ago when the Human Genome Project, led by Dr. Francis Collins, sequenced the entire human genome. 3 billion base pairs and about 30,000 genes. And you realize they discovered in that process that there are millions of DNA variations. Yes, we're all human, but we all have millions, literally, of these variations in the base. And some of them are actually harmful. Most are not. Sickle cell disease, for example, you know, is one substitution in that 3 billion in the right place. That one mistake causes sickle cell disease. And also, just to give you a little sense of this, is how DNA testing works. We're able to test the DNA from a crime scene and say with great certainty if you were the culprit or not, based on DNA. And as you probably have heard the news in the last year or less, been a lot of people who have gotten let out, thank God, from prison because DNA testing shows clearly they were not the person, not the culprit. So there's a practical aspect to this. I just love this little picture here. I don't know how many of you recognize these creatures. Of course, there's a human hand. But there's 3 little hedgehogs there. And that reminds me to tell you this little story, and then I want to ask you a question. Now, you know that these hedgehogs, they all came from a single cell, right? You know that the mother's egg was fertilized by the father hedgehog's sperm, and it grew in the mother for, I don't know how long they grow hedgehogs, but in the case of human beings, we spend average of about 9 months, and trillions of cell divisions later, we entered the world. Now, but did you ever stop to think, so every one of the trillions of cells in our body have been cloned by nature. They're all a copy. The DNA is a copy of the first one. And so every cell in our body has a copy of the same DNA. And I want to ask you, did you ever stop to think, if every cell in our body has a copy of the same DNA, the same 30,000 genes, how is it that some of it makes an ear, and some of it makes a toe, and some of it makes a brain? All have a copy of the same set of genes. The difference we've learned is in which genes are turned on and off. And in fact, we've come to realize now that the majority of the genes in most cells is actually quiescent or turned off. The genes are not all active the same way in every cell. If so, we would actually be a mass of whatever that would make, probably a mess. But anyway, so the liver genes are turned off in our ear. in essence. And in fact, did you realize it's not only ear genes, it's the right ear genes. I'm really happy for that. Because, I mean, when you really, just tell that little point there, it's so subtle, it's so important, these little different, so the switches are very important. Well, we don't inherit DNA. This is Dr. Whitelaw from Australia. She says what we inherit from our genes is what? From our parents? Our chromosomes. Now, you knew that. But the chromosomes are only 50% DNA. Did you know that? The other 50% is made up of protein molecules, and these proteins carry the epigenetic marks, or they are the epigenome, okay? And it turns out that this protein matrix is not inanimate. It is not inert. It is actually has heritable information in the genome, along with the genome. It has heritable information. The heritable information is, in essence, its switch settings, as we'll see. Now, here's a greatly magnified cell nucleus, and you can see the sort of black stuff in here. That's the chromosomes in working clothes. This is where they're, we call it chromatin in this stage. And that's where these genes are being transcribed, and the switches are on or off, etc. So here's what, bottom line, is the DNA and these chaperone proteins determine which genes are on or off at any given time, any given moment. And the part that is exciting is that we've learned that these switch settings, while they're stable, they're actually, a switch setting is actually a chemical bond. If you're a chemist, it's a covalent bond. It's a stable bond. But it's a reversible switch. So it's a switch that can be turned on and off. And what has the greatest effect? The strongest effect so far to date that has been discovered in changing switch settings is nutrition. It's diet. Yeah, I like that. That always took me just a while. I had to think about that a minute, chew on that. But anyway, but it is true. And as a student of the Bible and a believer, that's amazing. That is so amazing, because I learned from the Bible, in the first book of the Bible, that the major change that took place in the human race was from a dietary indiscretion. That probably understates it. It was a rebelliousness that led to a dietary indiscretion. But anyway, it was a dietary change. And I don't have time to go into this with you. I would love to show you, but the science is indicating that that is, in fact, the case, that longevity has been associated with diet change. So the genes are turned on and off, and the switch settings are inherited along with the chromosome, in the chromosome. These switch settings are inherited. They're transgenerational. And so we all started life. I guess we don't need to go into discussion tonight about when it started. But anyway, we all began life with a switch settings, and the genes turned on and off as a result of what happened to our grandparents. We've got studies now showing that what happens to your grandparents has affected the switch settings in your genes, and what happened to your parents, and what happened to you while you're in the womb. Now, did you just, if that sounds radical, just think about this a second. Do you realize that the ovum that are formed in the ovary in a female occurs while that female was in the womb of the grandmother? So the ovum from which I came was developed in my mother's ovary while she was in my grandmother's womb. And so it's not that hard to understand, actually, how what my grandmother did could have affected me, because I was there then. Well, sort of. Anyway. Oh, yes, I'll tell you the story about the agouti mouse. This agouti mouse is the pretty blonde there with the dollar signs, because the agouti mouse was engineered, genetically modified, so that they have diseases, they get the diseases of human beings, obesity, heart disease, diabetes, etc., so we could study these chronic human diseases in a mouse model. And the agouti mouse has these genes engineered into it. Well, some researchers at Duke a few years ago, a little over a decade ago, that were working on epigenetics, tried a unique experiment. They wanted to use the agouti mouse to see if they could, with lifestyle change, with diet, if they could change the switch settings on the genes that had been engineered into the mouse to cause disease. And so their hypothesis was that if we can turn those genes off, it should decrease the effect. Well, when the mother that they used had a baby, was born, amazingly, the baby didn't even look like the mother. One of the things that those genes that they put in intentionally did was they gave the mouse a certain color of fur, so it was easy to tell the agouti mouse. But here, this is not an agouti mouse. I mean, any of the lab technicians just looking would tell you, well, that's not an agouti mouse. But DNA testing reveals it is an agouti mouse. It has all of the genes that were engineered into the mouse to cause those diseases, but they are turned off. They are inoperable. This mouse does not have the propensity to be obese and to get those diseases that the mother had. And so in this case, they used a special diet to turn off some genes in utero, right? Okay, now let's look. Oh, yes, one more. This is amazing. Now, this is just summation of what the researchers said from their studies, that the effects of this special diet were evident 3 to 4 generations later. So for 3 to 4 generations, they could actually see the impact of what they had done to the mother while this baby was in utero. And think about the implications of that. I think it's good news, but it is also bad news, because as the lifestyle of our culture and our country have deteriorated, there are serious implications. And but the good news is that all of these things are reversible with the proper lifestyle choices. But of course, after I was born, my mom could change her diet. It didn't have much impact on me. But I can change mine and have an impact. Now I want to tell you about this experiment with the rats. We're working with mice. Now we're going to work with a rat. This was published in 2008, the Journal of Neuroscience. And you think, well, what in the world? Why would they be publishing something about diet in rats in neuroscience? And you'll see here in a minute. What they did here was they fed the mother who was pregnant a high-fat diet. Okay, the fat in her diet was similar to what you would get if you ate regularly at a fast food place. It was not that radical. You can accomplish the same level of fat in your diet very easily. Many Americans do. And what they did was they were able to show, with a lot of careful work, that while the baby was in utero and the mother was fed a high-fat diet, there's a chromosome on a gene on chromosome 3 that was overexpressed that caused its neurogenesis. It caused the overproduction of neurons, which migrated into the basal section of the brain in the developing fetus, and those neurons were active. They were hormonally active. They produced peptide hormones, which signaled in the adolescent. During adolescence, they were measuring these, and they signaled the higher blood lipids. It caused higher cholesterol levels. It caused a preference for a high-fat diet. Ate more food. Early puberty. More obesity. Sounds like a profile, doesn't it, that we're seeing? In fact, when this was announced, this article was first published was during an annual meeting of the American Heart Association, and the chairman, or whatever I think they call him, a chair of the American Heart Association, comment about it was there may be more to America's obesity epidemic than we have realized. And so, of course, this is just a rat. So let's look at a human study. This one, called the Geminal Study, was published that same year, 2008. Dean Ornish and his colleagues did this, and it was a study in 30, it's prospective, meaning they measured these things and then did the experiment, measured them. 30 men with indolent low-risk prostate cancer. So here's 30 men with prostate cancer who don't receive radiation or surgery, but instead they receive a comprehensive lifestyle change program. And basically what they received was, as you'll see here in a minute, the Dean Ornish program, which is for heart disease. What they did was they gave 2 needle biopsy specimens of the prostate cancer. So from this prostate tissue, the researchers were able to isolate small quantities of messenger RNA. And you may remember messenger RNA is the molecule that is used to transcribe the gene in the nucleus and send those instructions out into the cytoplasm to be turned into protein. And the half-life of a messenger RNA is measured in hours or days. Greetings to some of you. I see more faces I recognize. And so from that, in essence, messenger RNA becomes a good way to tell which genes are on, right? Because the messenger RNA only lasts a few hours, so you can tell what the change is over the 90 days. The lifestyle change program was not that radical. If you look at it, looking at the dietary, 10% of energy from fat. That's low fat, indeed, but it's achievable. I've eaten it. It's not that hard to do. Whole foods, plant-based, supplemented with some soy, and all the food was provided so that the men were able to stay on the program. And here's what they call a heat map. This is a way to look at a global picture of gene expression, and dark or red colors indicate more gene expression, higher amounts of messenger RNA, and the cooler, the greens and the light colors, that is less. So here we're just looking at there's a column here for every man. So there's 30 columns before the intervention, 30 columns afterwards, and each row is a different gene. And these are a group of genes that we know are associated with cancer. Basically, you can see easily that there was a significant change in the gene expression. In fact, there were hundreds of genes that had a change in gene expression, and in general, the ones known to be associated with cancer were turned down, and the ones associated with fighting cancer or preventing cancer went up, and as a result of this 90-day program. You can see why that led Dr. Girdle. Now, Dr. Girdle is the gentleman whose lab did the study with the agouti mice, a pioneer in this field. He says, epigenetics is proving we have some responsibility for the integrity of our genome. Before, genes predetermined outcomes. Now, everything we do, everything we eat or smoke can affect our gene expression and that of future generations. Epigenetics introduces the concept of free will into our understanding of genetics. Friends, you can see why I consider this such important information in lifestyle medicine, because there's so many people who have the impression or the idea that genes are fate. There's nothing you can do about it. And I'm not saying that you can do something about every gene, but there's good evidence that the majority of them you can. And this was only in a 90-day, this was a 3-month program that we just looked at in those men. Now, Dr. Feinberg from Johns Hopkins, not too far away from here, wrote in the Journal of American Medical Association in 2008 about this, and he says that epigenetics, well, you just read what he says, epigenetics is at the epicenter of modern medicine, and it helps explain the relationship between an individual's genetic background, their genome, the environment, aging, and disease. So the epigenome varies between tissues, as we said, the ear, the toe, during a lifetime, whereas the DNA sequence remains essentially unchanged. So when I said that our lifestyle can change our genome, it can change those gene switch settings. And as we saw in the agouti mouse, if you turn it off, it's like it's not there. And so that's good news. And what's exciting to me about this as a physician, a lifestyle medicine physician, is that do you know what's at the epicenter of epigenetics? Is lifestyle change. Because diet is the most powerful modulator right now. There's a whole field called nutrigenomics that is, of course, seeking to determine specific nutrients to turn on and off specific genes. It's proving to be very difficult because the nutrients don't impact a single gene. They impact multiple genes, and it's a great large symphony going on there. But epigenetics is at the epicenter of modern medicine, and lifestyle change is at the center of epigenetics. So changing your diet and lifestyle changes your epigenome, which in turn changes gene expression, which in turn changes you literally. So if we think of health as the outcome or the phenotype, we actually find that the DNA sequence itself may only have about a 10% of an impact. Medical care, another 10%. Environment, 10%. But the real large one is the lifestyle choices, the epigenome. So I want to turn to that for a minute now. You know, in the same study that was done on the men with prostate cancer, these are the changes they observed in their risk factors. You can see they lost about 6 or 8 pounds, 2 pounds per kilogram. Blood pressure came down, cholesterol dropped wonderfully. Blood sugars are not shown in this chart, came down. So we could have called this a heart disease program, or we could have called it a diabetes treatment program. But they were getting treated for cancer, prostate cancer. By the way, quite successfully treated. So that led me to, I wanted to share with you a study done by Dr. Ornish looking at reversal of coronary heart disease, published 10 years earlier, and looking at can lifestyle changes reverse coronary heart disease. And it was called the Lifestyle Heart Trial. You can see there were 28 patients in the experimental group, a diet very similar to what we just read about. By the way, I would point out that they had no medications in the treatment group. And the 20 were in a usual care group, and they received normal medical care, therapeutic lifestyle change. That's what that stands for. They were instructed to make whatever therapeutic changes their doctor recommended. But in the treatment group, they were given a very specific intervention program. And here's what we found when they published the 5-year results. This is a graph that's the percent change in the blockage. So 0 would mean no change. So this 27, almost 28% increase, the blockage got worse, right? Over 5 years. By the way, is anybody other than a medical professional, any lay person in the audience, can you tell me what is the endpoint for that? I mean, what's happening to this control group? The endpoint is a heart attack, right? I mean, you continue to block the artery until it stops blood flow and you have a heart attack. So these people are on their way to a predictable heart attack, perhaps death. They were getting usual care. The treatment group, on the other hand, they had a reversal. The blockages were actually opening up. Not a lot, but about 8% reduction over 5 years. And so we could say, I would say, if it was my mother, I would say that in the control group, she wasn't actually getting adequate treatment, but in the treatment group, she was getting adequate treatment. Now let me show you another one. I'm just going through these real quickly because the point I want to show you, if you don't know about this, is the basis for lifestyle change. We looked at epigenetics, how it works. So let's look at the clinical results. There's called the portfolio diet. 46 people with high cholesterol, hyperlipidemic, so were randomized to 3 groups. They got a step 2 diet, which is the advanced American Heart Association diet. It was low in saturated fat, so forth. There was 16. Another group had the diet, plus they got a drug, lovastatin. This is a typical starting dose for a cholesterol medication. And the third group had a portfolio diet, and it was high in steroid oils, and well, it was soy and okra and almonds. It was a diet that any of us right here could just choose on our own and eat. Published in 2003. This has been a while, hasn't it? Here's what the results showed. Showed that the lovastatin group and the portfolio, that's down here, was significantly better than the step 2 control. So what this is showing us is the ones that had just the step 2 diet with no medication were up here in the red oval. But the ones that had the step 2 diet and the medication were down here, as were the ones with the portfolio diet with no medication. So the reason this is a milestone is here is a head-to-head comparison of a lifestyle change to a drug and showing no statistically significant difference. Yeah, no significant difference. Is that these little bars are the error bars. So they overlap. That means there's no significant difference. Another one you need to know about. This was a randomized study published in 2004 in the American Heart Association's Circulation Journal. I'm just mentioning these things so that you know these are high credibility journals. We're not talking about some little thing. And the question was, how did lifestyle change compare to percutaneous coronary intervention or stent and angioplasty stent for heart disease? And it was a prospective trial. 51 patients were assigned to exercise group. And you can see here, over 20 minutes a day on the bicycle and a maximum heart rate. They only went up to 70% of their maximum heart rate. And then 60 minutes a week of aerobic group. The other group were assigned to get the stent and the angioplasty. Now don't answer out loud, but do this little exercise. It's your grandmother or somebody important to you, and they've gotten put into this study. And which group are you like, boy, I really hope they get in? Which one are you naturally thinking, wow, I sure hope she gets whatever? Well, I think I know, which most of us would, even those of us who know that that's not the right answer, are thinking, is she going to get a stent or is she going to get exercise? Well, anyway, now you can relieve your stress because the results showed that the symptom-free, 88% of those who had exercise group were symptom-free, in essence cured. Only 70% of those who had a stent angioplasty were symptom-free at 1 year. So there's a relative difference of over 25%. The best treatment in this study was the exercise, not the angioplasty stent. And some of you may actually know that without lifestyle changes, the data shows that a stent is going to malfunction or plug up or not be functional within 6 months, for example. And then I just want to show you this because this is amazing. This was published in 2009 New England Journal. And what this was a study that was done looking at the effect of how the vein taken out of your leg to use as the bypass for your coronary bypass, how did the way that vein was harvested affect the half-life or how long the vein would last, okay? So they two ways of getting it. One is open harvest. And when I took my training and I'm not a surgeon, but I had, like all medical doctors, I had some training. We did open harvest. I never saw an endoscopic saphenous vein harvest. I know it could be done, but we didn't do it. And here's what you can see is that the 12 to 18-month failure rate, if it's open harvest, is 38%. If it's endoscopic, it's 47%. So what is this telling you? It's telling you that the published results in the New England Journal for the failure rate of a bypass graft is over 40% in 12 to 18 months. I think that ought to be part of the informed consent, actually. But anyhow, as a contrast, here is Dr. Joe Crow from the Cleveland Clinic, who is a colleague of Dr. Esselstyn. And this was the way his left anterior artery looked with all the lumpy, bumpy. And then 32 months later, that's how it looked. Let me take a bigger picture. 32 months on a plant-based diet, and Joe, actually, Dr. Crow could not take statins because of allergy or problems with it. And so you can see 32 months can make a drastic improvement. And then diabetes prevention program published 10 years ago. This was a randomized trial. The people with about 3,000 with impaired glucose tolerance, means they were what we might call pre-diabetic, okay? They were put on a step 1 diet. This is the American Heart Association diet, and they got a placebo pill. The second group had the diet plus metformin. Some of you may know metformin is one of our better medications for diabetes and insulin resistance. And the third group were a lifestyle modification, no medication. And they had exercise, and they had to have a weight loss. So it was a vigorous program. And here's what the results showed, was that the advice-only group is used as our control group. They had 11 that developed diabetes during this study. The ones that got metformin plus the advice, only 7.8. But the one on the lifestyle, they had only 4.8. So the relative risk, these in essence, what this is saying, these people over here in the green, they had 44% of the risk of those who were just getting advice. Harvard has studied these things, and I want to just show you that they found that every daily serving of fruits and vegetables reduced the risk of heart disease by 4%. So, isn't it amazing? This was published over 10 years ago. Isn't it amazing the litany of evidence for lifestyle medicine? And then the Adventist Health Study. You familiar with it? They compared the 34,000 Adventists to others in California, and they found that the Adventists lived 7 to 14 years longer, and those who were the longest ate the most plant foods, those who ate and the least meat. So eating more plant foods and less animal foods, they live longer. And by the way, they showed that eating vegetables, also eating nuts, and also drinking water, each was shown independently to cut heart disease risk. And you may have seen this, right? The National Geographic, that's been what, 6 years ago, 5 years ago? Well, now, do you realize that while Seventh-day Adventists are getting recognized for their extra longevity, that New England Journal in 2005 published data showing that after over 200 years of increasing lifespan, this may be the first generation to live a shorter lifespan than their parents. So while the world, let me catch this, while the world is in the U.S. is declining in lifespan, evidence is that Adventists are having greater lifespan. That will get any thinking person's attention. You know, what is going on here? And it has gotten their attention. So the question is, what is the source of Adventist longevity? And you may be aware that the Blue Zone and other things, people are asking that question. They're putting it on national television and on radio programs. I saw, what was it? Which one of the journals? U.S. News and World Report, I think, had 10 ways to live longer. One of them was live like a Seventh-day Adventist. I thought, they don't even know what they're saying, but it's so true. But, yeah, we do, and we need to tell others. But anyway, Adventist health habits, follow me here. They were not from 19th century science. Adventists have been doing this, advocating this. I can find it in our writings over 100 years ago. It did not come from the science of the day. The science of the day had just stopped bleeding, fevers. It had just stopped. Well, no, it was actually still recommending smoking for lung disease. And so what Adventists did was considered dangerous. There were studies published in the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s, that were looking to see if a vegetarian diet was safe. So it didn't come from science. In fact, scientists are learning about health and lifestyle from Seventh-day Adventists. And so where did it come from? Well, I believe the evidence is that it's a result of health principles found in the book Ministry of Healing, There's other places, but I use that one because that is a book written by the Ellen White, the author of these things. And it's actually been an acronym that's been developed called New Start from Weimar days. But it's on page 127 of Ministry Healing. You'll find the nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, temperance, air, rest, trust, and divine power. Yeah, there it is. Forgot I had that. So there's the quote, and there's the, Sally and I had the privilege of being at Weimar when that acronym was actually developed by one of the guests, Ernie. So the source of the principles, health principles in Ministry of Healing. The author of Ministry of Healing says she drew from the work of others. She says, I've used the words and the language and the explanation of others, and some we know that she had in her library, and she mentions our Doctors Graham, Alcott, Coles, and Jackson. And yet, she claims that inspiration was her source. You're familiar with this, I hope. This is not meant to be news to you, but I want to look at it in an interesting way. Dr. McMahon, a physician from Australia who I just spoke with recently when I was over there, in fact, has examined her borrowing. And what he did was he identified the individual teachings or ideas in the writings of the four main authors that she mentioned and in her book, Ministry of Healing. And he found there was 160-some individual things, for example, in the book, Ministry of Healing. And so his first task was he broke each one of these, and that was a lot of work. It took him actually 8 years, he said, to do this. But he broke each one of these authors' work down to individual pieces, specific recommendations. And then he took a group of himself and three other physicians who were physicians of some ability, and they categorized these things as either verified by modern medicine. Does modern medicine say this is good, or does modern medicine not say it's good? You know, it's either harmful or it has no opinion. And then what he did was he compared the verification rates, if you will, the percent, in other words, that were verified, considered verified, of the various authors. Now, why would he do that? Well, if the borrowing was unguided, it was just random borrowing, then the verification rate of what was borrowed should be the same as what was borrowed from. If I'm reaching blindly into a bucket of marbles, some half black, half white, and I'm pulling them out and putting them in another, I will end up with the same ratio of black and white marbles that there was in the bucket. And if you change the ratio over there and don't tell me, I'll end up with, right? But if I can look, okay, I can pick black ones out. So, if the verification rate were significantly higher, it would indicate some form of guidance. And because the author has said it was inspired guidance, I'm going to go along with that. So, what did Dr. McMahon research reveal? Some of you have seen this, no doubt. And I want to just look here. We're going to look at Graham, Alcott, Coles, Jackson, and then Ministry of Healing. Graham had a little over 100 items that were identified, and of those, 42% were considered verified. I'm not going to go into it, but some of those are considered minor and some major, and then the yellow is the unverified. If we look at Alcott, he was more prolific in his ideas, but his percent verified was actually lower. Look at Coles, 40% of his. Jackson, 42%. But Ministry of Healing was 87%. Well, that's good. But this one gets, well, let's look at this first. I wanted to show you that the verification rate improves with time in Ministry of Healing. They actually were able to do some careful examination of, based on 1960 knowledge and also 2000. And what Dr. McMahon found was that it was 59% in 60 and 87% in 2000. And I'm just asking you, I wonder what it will be in another 40 years after that. Because I don't know that it'll ever hit 100%, but it's headed upward. And then I want to look at this. What we're doing here is, I really appreciate his analytical mind. Dr. McMahon is a researcher. He's got a number of patents on some things. He's an ENT doc and a researcher. Intelligent fellow. This is Graham, Alcott, Coles, and Jackson. Okay, so if any four. So what you do is when you put, if it was an idea that was from all of them, if any of them had the, it comes out to close to 300 total, and about 31% that were verified. If we look at the ministry of healing and any four, so now we're going to look at which ones of those did ministry of healing include. And I wanted to point out something, that in this analysis we're assuming she borrowed everything that the others had written, even though actually she might not have borrowed it. It might have been de novo on her part. But we're just going to say that it was anything that was in both sources is borrowed, was 85%. And if you look at those that were any of them but not selected, it's only 17% that were verified. And when you look at the ones that were in ministry healing but not in any of the others, it was the highest of all, 91%. So the whole idea that her validity came from borrowing from good sources is just utterly demolished by this analysis. Actually, the things she wrote on her own that nobody said were more likely to be verified than the things that she borrowed from somebody else. And then here's one that's very interesting, and that is looking now at just the items that all four authors said. So if all four of them said this, you would expect that ought to be pretty good stuff. And it turns out that it was better. 66% has shown to be verified as of 2000. But if you look at the ones that Ministry of Healing had chosen of those, it still bumped it up to a higher number, 82%. And when you look at all of them agreed on, but Ellen White's book, Ministry of Healing, left out, it's not too good. 20% of those. Now, she never claimed that Ministry of Healing was